The HOA president stood over my bleeding 8-year-old daughter, gun still smoking in her hand. My baby had been drawing butterflies with chalk on our sidewalk. That was her crime. That was why she lay dying on our lawn, clutching her shattered shoulder, screaming for me while her blood pooled beneath her small body. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The gunshot echoed through Maple Grove Lane like thunder splitting the sky. I was in my kitchen, hands deep in dishwater when I heard it. That sharp, unmistakable crack that makes your blood turn to ice. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Car backfiring. Fireworks left over from the 4th of July, even though it was September. Anything but what it actually was. Then I heard my daughter scream, "Emma, I don't remember running. I don't remember throwing open the front door or racing down our driveway. All I remember is the sight that greeted me on our front lawn and the way my heart stopped beating in my chest." My 8-year-old daughter was on the ground clutching her shoulder, blood seeping between her tiny fingers. Her face was white as paper, eyes wide with shock and terror. And standing over her, gun still raised, was Margaret Henderson, the HOA president of our neighborhood. "She broke the rules," Margaret said coldly, her thin lips pressed into a hard line. "I warned you people. I warned all of you." Time moved in slow motion and lightning speed all at once. I dropped to my knees beside Emma, pressing my hands over hers, feeling the warm, sticky blood that was too red, too much too real. My baby was bleeding. My baby had been shot. "Mom," Emma whimpered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, it hurts. I know, sweetheart. I know you're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." But I didn't know if I was lying. I didn't know anything except that the woman who had made our lives hell for the past 6 months had just shot my child. Someone called 911. I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. Mrs. Patterson from next door already had her phone out, her hands shaking as she spoke to the dispatcher. Mr. Chun from across the street was running toward us. Other neighbors were emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion, their faces reflecting the horror I felt in my soul. "She was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk," Margaret said, as if that explained everything, as if that justified anything. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no permanent or semi-permanent markings are allowed on any common areas that include sidewalks. I stared at her, unable to process the words coming from her mouth. My daughter was bleeding, possibly dying, and this woman was citing HOA bylaws. "You shot a child," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You shot my baby over chalk." "I enforced the rules," Margaret corrected, finally lowering the gun. "I've given you 17 violations in the past 6 months. 17 warnings. Your grass was a /4 in too tall. Your mailbox was the wrong shade of white. Your daughter's bicycle was visible from the street. And now this. I have the authority to enforce compliance by any means necessary. It's in the bylaws. No bylaw gives you the right to shoot a child." Mr. Chin shouted, his face red with fury. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Emma's breathing was becoming shallow, her skin cold and clammy under my touch. I kept pressure on the wound, kept talking to her, kept begging her to stay with me. "Tell me about your drawing, baby. What were you drawing?" "Butterflies," Emma gasped. "Pretty butterflies. Pink and purple ones for you, Mommy. Because you said you missed seeing butterflies in the garden." My heart shattered into a million pieces. My little girl had been drawing me butterflies with sidewalk chalk. Beautiful, washable, harmless sidewalk chalk, and she had been shot for it. The paramedics arrived first, their red and white ambulance screeching to a halt in front of our house. They were professional, efficient, kind. They moved me gently aside and went to work on Emma, their hands sure and steady, even as mine trembled uncontrollably. "Entry wound to the right shoulder," one of them reported. "Exit wound in the back. Possible bone involvement. BP is dropping. We need to move now." They lifted Emma onto a stretcher and I climbed into the ambulance with her, never letting go of her uninjured hand. As the doors began to close, I saw the police arrive. I saw officers approaching Margaret, who still stood on my lawn, gun at her side, looking indignant rather than remorseful. "I want to press charges," I heard her say as the ambulance doors shut. "That child violated HOA regulations. I have documentation." The ambulance raced toward Mercy General Hospital, siren screaming. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time her eyes fluttered closed, I felt like I was drowning. "Stay with me, Emma. Please stay with me. Think about butterflies, baby. Think about all the colors. Think about how we're going to paint your room any color you want when we get home. Any color at all. Purple, pink, rainbow, whatever you want. Even though HOA says only neutral colors." Emma whispered. I choked on a sob. Even now, bleeding and terrified, my baby was worried about breaking rules that had been drilled into us through citation after citation. Fine after fine, threat after threat. "I don't care what the HOA says anymore, sweetheart. I don't care about any of their rules. All I care about is you." The hospital was chaos. Doctors in scrubs. Nurses with clipboards. Someone asking me questions I could barely understand. Insurance information. Medical history. How did this happen? How did this happen? How does any mother explain that a neighbor shot her child over sidewalk chalk? They wheeled Emma into surgery. I wasn't allowed to follow. A kind nurse with warm brown eyes led me to a private waiting room and brought me water I couldn't drink and tissues I couldn't stop using. "Your daughter is strong," she said gently. "Dr. Morrison is the best trauma surgeon we have. She's in good hands, but she was in any hands other than mine, and that was unbearable." My husband, David, burst through the door 20 minutes later. He had been at work 40 minutes away when Mrs. Patterson called him. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fear. "Where is she? Is she alive? Tell me she's alive." "She's in surgery." I managed. "They said the bullet went through her shoulder. They're working on her now." David collapsed into the chair beside me and we held each other. Two parents united in terror and helplessness. We had always protected Emma from scraped knees and bad dreams and mean kids at school, but we hadn't protected her from this. From a woman so consumed by petty power that she saw an 8-year-old girl with chalk as a threat worthy of violence. A detective arrived an hour later. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, mid-40s, with sharp eyes that had seen too much but still held compassion. She sat across from us and took our statement, her pen moving across her notepad in quick, efficient strokes. "Margaret Henderson has been arrested. She told us she's being charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, child endangerment, and unlawful use of a firearm. She's claiming she acted within her authority as HOA president. She actually brought a copy of the bylaws to the station. There's nothing in any bylaw that allows someone to shoot a child," David said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "No, there isn't," Detective Rodriguez agreed. "But I need you to understand something. Mrs. Henderson genuinely believes she was justified. She's showing no remorse. She's demanding an attorney and insisting that she'll sue your family for the violations your daughter committed." I laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. "She shot our daughter and wants to sue us. I'm telling you this so you're prepared for what's coming. This is going to be a difficult case emotionally, but I promise you we're going to make sure justice is served." The surgery lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes. I know because I watched every second tick by on the waiting room clock, each one feeling like an eternity. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, my heart was in my throat. "Emma is stable," she said, and I felt David's hand tighten around mine. "The bullet damaged her shoulder joint and fractured her scapula. She's going to need extensive physical therapy, and there may be permanent mobility limitations in that arm. But she's alive and she's going to recover." "Can we see her?" I asked, already standing. "She's in recovery now. Give her another 30 minutes and then you can sit with her." Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. But when they finally let us in, when I saw Emma lying in that hospital bed, pale but breathing, alive and whole despite everything, I broke down completely. I sat beside her bed and held her hand and cried tears I didn't know I had. Emma woke up an hour later. She was groggy from anesthesia, confused about where she was. But when she saw us, she smiled weakly. "Hi, Mommy." "Hi, Daddy." "Hi, baby," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Sleepy. My shoulder hurts." "I know, sweetheart. The doctors are going to help with that. You're going to be just fine." Is Henderson mad at me?" Emma asked, and my heart broke all over again. I didn't mean to break the rules. I was using washable chalk. I was going to clean it up. Promise. "You didn't do anything wrong," David said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing at all. You understand me, Emma. You were just being a kid. You were creating something beautiful. There is nothing wrong with that. But some rules are wrong, baby," I interrupted gently. "And anyone who would hurt a child for drawing with chalk is wrong. You are perfect exactly as you are. And you don't ever have to worry about Mrs. Henderson again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, Mommy. It hurt so much. And she looked so angry, like I was bad." I climbed carefully onto the bed beside her, mindful of her injuries, and held her as close as I dared. "You are not bad. You are wonderful and creative and kind, and what happened to you should never have happened. But you're safe now. We're here, and we're not going anywhere." Over the next 3 days, Emma remained in the hospital. The community response was overwhelming. Our neighbors brought food, flowers, cards. They set up a meal train and a fundraiser for medical expenses. They organized a protest outside Margaret Henderson's house, demanding her removal from the HOA board and changes to the bylaws that had created such a toxic environment. Mrs. Patterson visited with homemade soup and tears in her eyes. "I should have done more," she said. "We all should have. Margaret has been escalating for months. The fines, the threats, the constant surveillance. We were all afraid of her, but we should have stood up before it came to this." "This isn't your fault," I assured her, though part of me agreed. How had it gotten this far? How had a neighborhood organization meant to maintain property values become a dictatorship that cost my daughter her innocence and nearly her life? The answer came in pieces through conversations with neighbors and journalists who caught wind of the story. Margaret Henderson had been HOA president for 4 years. In that time, she had driven out 3 families through relentless harassment. She had issued hundreds of violations for infractions so minor they were laughable. Dandelions in lawns, decorative flags not approved by the architectural committee, children playing too loudly in their own yards. But it went deeper than power-hungry pettiness. Margaret's adult son had died 5 years earlier in a motorcycle accident. He had been speeding, not wearing a helmet, breaking multiple traffic laws. After his death, Margaret had become obsessed with rules, with order, with forcing compliance. If rules could be enforced strictly enough, if everyone could be made to follow them perfectly, then maybe tragedies could be prevented. It was twisted logic born of grief and trauma, but it didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't bring back my daughter's sense of safety or the full mobility of her right arm. The trial was set for 3 months later, but Margaret's attorney tried everything to get it dismissed or delayed. They argued that the HOA bylaws gave her broad enforcement powers. They claimed she had acted in defense of property values. They even suggested that Emma's presence on the sidewalk could have been construed as threatening. The judge shut that down immediately. An 8-year-old child drawing with washable chalk is not a threat under any reasonable interpretation. This case will proceed to trial. Emma started physical therapy 2 weeks after being discharged. It was painful and frustrating. Simple movements that had once been effortless now brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't lift her arm above her shoulder. She couldn't do the monkey bars at school. She couldn't play the piano, which she had just started learning and loved. "I hate this," she sobbed one night after a particularly difficult therapy session. "I hate that she did this to me. I hate that I can't do things anymore. I hate that I'm scared all the time now." I held her and let her cry because what else could I do? I couldn't give her back what had been taken. I couldn't erase the trauma or repair the damage instantly. All I could do was be there, be steady, be the safe place she needed. "You won't always feel this way," I promised her. "It's going to get easier. You're getting stronger every day. And one day you're going to be able to do everything you used to do and maybe even more because you're brave, Emma. So much braver than you know." The community rallied around us in ways that restored my faith in humanity. Teachers at Emma's school organized a fundraiser. Local businesses donated gift cards and services. A group of parents formed butterflies for Emma, creating chalk drawings of butterflies on sidewalks all over town with permission from property owners. It was a beautiful act of solidarity that made Emma smile for the first time in weeks. The trial began on a cold January morning. The courthouse was packed. Local news cameras lined the street outside. Margaret Henderson arrived in a pristine suit. Her gray hair pulled back severely, her face showing no emotion. She looked like she was attending a business meeting, not facing charges for shooting a child. I sat in the front row with David, our hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles turned white. Emma was with my mother that morning, spared from having to face her attacker until absolutely necessary. I had barely slept the night before, replaying that horrible day over and over, wondering if justice would truly be served or if somehow Margaret would find a way to escape accountability. The prosecution's case was straightforward and damning. They presented Emma's medical records, photos of her injuries, testimony from the paramedics and surgeons who had treated her. They called neighbors who described Margaret's escalating behavior, her threats, her obsessive enforcement of trivial rules. Mr. Chin testified about the time Margaret had threatened to sue him because his roses grew too in over the property line. Mrs. Patterson described receiving 43 violation notices in a single year, each one more petty than the last. A family who had moved away 2 years earlier returned to testify about how Margaret had made their lives so miserable they had no choice but to leave despite loving their home. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Margaret Henderson had been building toward violence for years. The shooting wasn't an isolated incident of temporary insanity. It was the culmination of years of unchecked power, escalating aggression, and a complete disconnection from reality and human decency. And then they called Emma to the stand. My brave, beautiful daughter, still wearing a sling on her right arm, walked to the witness box with her head high. She was sworn in, and the prosecutor approached with gentle eyes. Emma, can you tell us what happened on September 14th? Emma's voice was small but clear. I was drawing butterflies on the sidewalk in front of my house with chalk, pink and purple ones because those are my favorite colors. I was making them for my mom. Did anyone tell you not to draw on the sidewalk? Mrs. Henderson sent us a letter, but Mommy said walk chalk was okay because it washes away with rain. It's not permanent. What happened while you were drawing? Emma's composure cracked slightly, her eyes filling with tears. Mrs. Henderson came out of her house. She was yelling about rules and violations. She said I was destroying property values. I said I was sorry and I would wash it off, but she kept yelling. And then Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. And then she pulled out a gun. I thought she was just trying to scare me. But then it was so loud and it hurt so much and I didn't understand why she would do that. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge had to pause to compose himself before allowing the defense their cross-examination. Margaret's attorney tried to paint Emma as disrespectful, as someone who had repeatedly violated rules despite warnings. But Emma's innocence and honesty shone through every answer. Did you think the rules about sidewalk chalk were fair? The defense attorney asked. I don't know, Emma said thoughtfully. I think kids should be allowed to play and make art. But I also think people should try to follow rules when they're good rules. I just don't think shooting someone is ever a good rule. The attorney had no response to that. Margaret took the stand in her own defense, and it was chilling. She showed no remorse, no understanding of what she had done. She spoke about property values and community standards and the importance of strict enforcement. She genuinely believed she had been protecting the neighborhood. Those children were out of control, she said, her voice sharp and unyielding, running around, making noise, leaving their toys out. Every day, another violation every day, another threat to our community's integrity. Someone had to take a stand. So, you shot an 8-year-old child, the prosecutor said flatly. I took necessary action to enforce compliance, Margaret corrected. You shot a child who was drawing with chalk. I enforced the rules. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. guilty of attempted murder, guilty of aggravated assault, guilty of child endangerment, guilty of unlawful use of a firearm. Margaret stood emotionless as the verdicts were read. She showed no reaction when the judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole. She simply straightened her jacket and allowed the bailiffs to lead her away. But as she passed our table, she turned to look at Emma one last time, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not quite remorse, but perhaps recognition. Recognition that her obsession with rules and control had cost her everything, had destroyed lives, had taken her from a grieving mother to a convicted felon. "I hope you're satisfied," she said coldly to me. "You've ruined the neighborhood." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." The aftermath was long and complicated. The HOA was completely restructured. Margaret's draconian bylaws were repealed and replaced with reasonable guidelines focused on genuine community well-being rather than petty control. 3 new board members were elected, including Mrs. Patterson, who promised transparency and compassion. The community held meetings to discuss how things had gotten so bad, how one person had been allowed to wield so much power with so little oversight. People shared their stories of harassment, of living in fear in their own homes, of teaching their children to hide and be quiet instead of play and laugh. It was heartbreaking to realize how many families had suffered in silence, afraid to speak up because Margaret controlled fines, liens, and could make their lives even more difficult. New safeguards were put in place. No single board member could issue violations without approval from the full board. There would be regular elections with term limits. A complaint process was established for homeowners who felt they were being unfairly targeted. The neighborhood was determined to ensure that what happened to Emma could never happen to another child. Local news coverage brought national attention. We were invited to appear on morning talk shows, but we declined most of them. This wasn't about fame or publicity. It was about healing injustice. However, we did agree to one interview with a journalist who promised to handle Emma's story with sensitivity and use it to highlight the broader issues of HOA overreach across America. Emma's physical recovery continued slowly. After 6 months, she regained most of the mobility in her arm, though she still couldn't lift it quite as high as before. Her emotional recovery took longer. She had nightmares for months. She was afraid of loud noises. She didn't want to draw or play outside. School was particularly difficult. Other children asked intrusive questions. Some parents whispered and stared. A few well-meaning teachers treated Emma like she was fragile, made of glass that might shatter at any moment. Emma hated all of it. The neighborhood was determined to ensure that what happened to Emma could never happen to another child. Local news coverage brought national attention. We were invited to appear on morning talk shows, but we declined most of them. This wasn't about fame or publicity. It was about healing injustice. However, we did agree to one interview with a journalist who promised to handle Emma's story with sensitivity and use it to highlight the broader issues of HOA overreach across America. Emma's physical recovery continued slowly. After 6 months, she regained most of the mobility in her arm, though she still couldn't lift it quite as high as before. Her emotional recovery took longer. She had nightmares for months. She was afraid of loud noises. She didn't want to draw or play outside. School was particularly difficult. Other children asked intrusive questions. Some parents whispered and stared. A few well-meaning teachers treated Emma like she was fragile, made of glass that might shatter at any moment. Emma hated all of it. She didn't want to be the girl who got shot. She just wanted to be Emma again. We got her a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. Dr. Sarah Chun was wonderful, helping Emma process what had happened and giving her tools to cope with her fear and anger. Slowly, gradually, Emma began to heal. The day she drew on the sidewalk again was a victory. It was nearly a year after the shooting on a sunny Saturday morning. I watched from the porch as Emma knelt on the concrete, a box of chalk in every color of the rainbow beside her. Her hand shook as she picked up the first piece of chalk, pink, just like before. She hesitated, glancing back at me for reassurance. "It's okay, baby," I called. "Draw whatever you want. You're safe." And she did. She drew butterflies again, dozens of them, spreading their wings across the sidewalk in brilliant colors. She drew flowers and rainbows and hearts. She drew words, hope and brave and free. The neighbors came out to watch and cheer. Mrs. Patterson brought her own chalk and added to the masterpiece. Mr. Chen's grandchildren joined in. Soon, the entire cul-de-sac was covered in chalk art, a community celebration of childhood and creativity and resilience. Emma looked up at me with a genuine smile, the first I'd seen in months. "Look, Mommy, butterflies everywhere, just like you wanted." I sat down beside her on that sidewalk, wrapping my arm around her shoulders, careful of her healing injury. We sat there in the sunshine, surrounded by chalk art and kind neighbors and the certain knowledge that we had survived something terrible. "You know what, Emma?" I said softly. "I was wrong before. I don't miss butterflies in the garden because the most beautiful butterfly I've ever seen is sitting right here next to me. You emerged from something dark and painful and you're still here, still creating, still beautiful. That's what butterflies do. They transform. They survive. They fly." Emma leaned against me, her small body warm and solid and alive. "I like that, Mommy. I like being a butterfly." "Me too, baby. Me too." The lawsuits that followed were complex. We sued Margaret Henderson for damages, though she had few assets to compensate us with. We sued the HOA for creating an environment that enabled her behavior. That case settled out of court for an amount that would cover Emma's medical expenses and therapy for years to come. But more importantly, Emma's case became a catalyst for change. Laws were proposed and passed limiting HOA enforcement powers. National organizations formed to protect homeowners from overzealous boards. Emma's story was featured in news articles and documentaries, raising awareness about the dark side of neighborhood associations when they become instruments of control rather than community. Emma herself became an advocate. At 9 years old, she spoke at a city council meeting about the importance of letting children be children, of valuing creativity over conformity. She was poised and articulate, and she received a standing ovation. "I used to think rules were the most important thing," she told the council members. "But I learned that people are more important than rules. Kindness is more important than rules. And kids should be allowed to draw with chalk without being afraid." 2 years after the shooting, Emma started piano lessons again. Her teacher was patient and encouraging, working with her limitations while celebrating her strengths. It took longer to build up the strength in her right hand, but she persevered. And the day she played her first complete song with both hands, we all cried happy tears. She chose to play a piece called Butterflies Dancing. It was simple but beautiful, and she played it perfectly. Her piano teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled me aside after that lesson with tears in her eyes. "Your daughter has something special," she said. "Not just talent, though she has that too, but resilience, heart, the ability to take something broken and make it whole again through sheer determination and love. That's rare, especially in someone so young." I watched Emma through the window of the music room, carefully packing up her sheet music with her good hand, her injured arm moving more fluidly than it had in months. She was humming the melody she had just played, a small smile on her face. "She gets that from her father," I said, though I knew it wasn't entirely true. Emma's strength was her own, forged in fire and trauma, refined through pain and persistence. She had been forced to grow up too fast to face horrors no child should ever experience. But somehow, miraculously, she had not been destroyed by it. Margaret Henderson remained in prison unrepentant, according to reports. She refused interviews, refused to engage with rehabilitation programs, refused to acknowledge that what she had done was wrong. Some people are so consumed by their need for control that they can never see beyond it, never find their way back to humanity. Prison officials reported that Margaret spent her days writing lengthy complaints about prison conditions, citing regulations, and demanding strict enforcement of rules against other inmates. "She gets that from her father," I said, though I knew it wasn't entirely true. Emma's strength was her own, forged in fire and trauma, refined through pain and persistence. She had been forced to grow up too fast to face horrors no child should ever experience. But somehow, miraculously, she had not been destroyed by it. Margaret Henderson remained in prison unrepentant, according to reports. She refused interviews, refused to engage with rehabilitation programs, refused to acknowledge that what she had done was wrong. Some people are so consumed by their need for control that they can never see beyond it, never find their way back to humanity. Prison officials reported that Margaret spent her days writing lengthy complaints about prison conditions, citing regulations, and demanding strict enforcement of rules against other inmates. Even behind bars, she could not let go of her obsession with control and compliance. It would have been darkly comedic if it weren't so tragic. I tried not to think about her often. When I did, I felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. Anger for what she had stolen from my daughter, from our family, from our sense of safety in our own home. Pity for whatever pain had twisted her into someone capable of such cruelty. But mostly I focused on Emma, on her laughter returning. On her confidence rebuilding. On the way, she had taken something horrific and somehow found a way to transform it into purpose and strength. 3 years after the shooting, we sold our house on Maple Grove Lane and moved to a different neighborhood. Not because we were running away, but because we were ready to start fresh, to live somewhere without the constant reminders of that terrible day. The decision hadn't been easy. Part of me wanted to stay, to refuse to be driven from our home by Margaret's violence. But Emma had nightmares every time she walked past the spot where she had been shot. The blood stain had been cleaned away within hours, but she could still see it, still feel it. Every time she looked at Margaret's empty house across the street, boarded up and awaiting sale, she relived that moment of terror. "I want to live somewhere with happy memories," Emma had said one night, her voice small and tired. "Somewhere that doesn't hurt to look at." So we moved. We found a beautiful house in a neighborhood with a much smaller, more reasonable HOA, one that focused on genuine community building rather than authoritarian control. The president of this HOA was a retired teacher named Tom who organized block parties and holiday decorating contests, who believed in encouraging families rather than punishing them. Our new house had a driveway perfect for chalk art. It had a backyard with a garden that attracted real butterflies. It had neighbors who were kind without being controlling, who understood that a community is built on compassion, not compliance. The first week in our new home, neighbors brought welcome baskets and introduced themselves warmly. No one mentioned HOA rules or violations or anything remotely threatening. Instead, they talked about the neighborhood book club, the summer barbecues, the kids' Halloween parade that everyone looked forward to each year. "You're going to love it here," said our next-door neighbor, a woman named Jennifer with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "It's a real community. People actually care about each other, not just about property values." Emma was 11 now, growing tall and strong. The scar on her shoulder had faded to a thin white line, barely visible except when she wore tank tops in the summer. She still went to therapy once a month, still had occasional nightmares, still flinched sometimes at loud noises. But she was also thriving. She had friends who didn't know her as the girl who got shot, but simply as Emma, who was funny and artistic and brave. She had interests and hobbies and dreams for the future. She wanted to be an art teacher, she said, or maybe a lawyer who helps kids do or possibly both. "I want to help people be creative without being scared," she explained when I asked about her dreams. "I want everyone to know that it's okay to color outside the lines sometimes. That rule should protect people, not hurt them." The first summer in our new house, Emma organized a sidewalk chalk art festival in our neighborhood. She advertised it on community boards, invited every family with children, and spent her own money on boxes and boxes of chalk. She called it Butterflies for Everyone. Dozens of families showed up. Children and parents alike covered the streets with art. There were butterflies, of course, but also dragons and spaceships, flowers and superheroes, abstract designs and detailed portraits. It was chaotic and colorful and absolutely perfect. As I watched Emma directing the festivities, laughing and encouraging younger children, showing them how to blend colors and create shading, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude that she was alive. Gratitude that she had found her way back to joy. Gratitude for every person who had supported us through the darkest time of our lives. That evening, as the sun set and families began to pack up their chalk and head home, Emma came and sat beside me on our front steps. "Today was perfect, Mommy. It really was, sweetheart," Do you think Mrs. Henderson will ever understand? She asked suddenly, her expression thoughtful. That what she did was wrong. That hurting people for breaking little rules doesn't make anything better. I considered the question carefully. I don't know, baby. Some people are so stuck in their way of thinking that they can't see anything else. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is just to keep being you. Keep being kind and creative and brave. Emma nodded, leaning against my shoulder. I forgive her, not because what she did was okay, but because I don't want to be angry forever. Angry feels heavy. Forgiving feels like flying. I wrapped my arm around her and held her close. Do you think Mrs. Henderson will ever understand? She asked suddenly, her expression thoughtful. That what she did was wrong. That hurting people for breaking little rules doesn't make anything better. I considered the question carefully. I don't know, baby. Some people are so stuck in their way of thinking that they can't see anything else. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is just to keep being you. Keep being kind and creative and brave. Emma nodded, leaning against my shoulder. I forgive her, not because what she did was okay, but because I don't want to be angry forever. Angry feels heavy. Forgiving feels like flying. I wrapped my arm around her and held her close. This child who had endured so much and emerged so strong. This butterfly who had transformed pain into purpose, trauma into advocacy, fear into courage. You're going to change the world, Emma, I whispered. You already have. She smiled up at me, her eyes bright with possibility. Maybe. But first I want to change our driveway. I'm thinking a mural. Something with lots of butterflies and maybe some words about being brave and kind. What do you think? I think that sounds absolutely perfect. And as the stars began to appear overhead, as our neighborhood settled into peaceful evening, as my daughter planned her next creative project, I realized something important. Margaret Henderson had tried to break us with her bullet and her hatred, but she had failed. Because you cannot break people who know how to transform. You cannot destroy those who choose growth over bitterness, hope over fear, creation over destruction. Emma had been shot for drawing butterflies, but she had become one instead, spreading her wings and teaching others to fly, and that was the most beautiful revenge of all, living fully, loving deeply, and creating fearlessly despite everything that had tried to stop her. Margaret Henderson would spend decades in a prison of concrete and steel, but she had already been trapped in a prison of her own making long before that. Bound by rigid rules and obsessive control and the inability to see beauty in a child's chalk drawing. Emma was free, and that freedom, that resilience, that unbreakable spirit would be her legacy. Not the shooting, not the trauma, not the violation of her innocence, but the art she created, the lives she touched, the world she would help transform. One chalk butterfly at a time. Justice had been served in the courtroom. But the true victory was written in colored chalk on sidewalks across our city, drawn by children who had heard Emma's story and learned that creativity is stronger than cruelty, that community is more powerful than control, and that even the darkest moments can be transformed into something beautiful. My daughter had been shot for breaking someone's petty rules. But she survived, she healed, and she flew. And that was everything.